Patricia Taylor, 76, stood in first class, only to be ruthlessly denied her seat and humiliated by a snide flight attendant. A pompous passenger smirked, his disdain evident, until Keanu Reeves stepped in, leaving everyone stunned into silence. What happened next turned the entire plane upside down and changed one life forever. But before we dive into this jaw-dropping story, drop a comment with your watch spot. If you're hooked on tales like this, subscribe now. Another stunner is coming tomorrow. Let's roll. On the morning of March 1st, 2025, Los Angeles awoke under a cold, gray sky, heavy with storm clouds foreshadowing trouble ahead. At the boarding gate of Pacific Wings Flight 217, Patricia Taylor clutched a worn canvas tote close to her chest. She wore a simple navy coat, its edges frayed from years of use, and scuffed low-heeled shoes, proof of a life spent on her feet. Despite the exhaustion in her gaze, a quiet spark remained. A retired costume designer, she had devoted her life to raising her son, Keanu Reeves, through years of sacrifice. Today, she was finally taking a long-awaited trip to New York to visit an old friend, a rare moment of peace she had been looking forward to for months. As she stepped into the first-class cabin, the air felt crisp and sterile, a sharp contrast to the damp chill outside. Outside, Patricia handed her ticket to the flight attendant, a young woman in her mid-20s with tightly pulled-back blonde hair and a smile that never reached her eyes. Her name tag read, Jessica. She glanced at the ticket, then frowned sharply. "Patricia Taylor? This is an economy ticket. First class isn't for you." Her tone was clipped, edged with impatience. Patricia hesitated, her hands trembling slightly. Whether from the cold or nerves, she wasn't sure. "I know," she said softly, "but I called ahead and was told I could get an upgrade if there was space. I'm not as strong as I used to be, and I was hoping—" Her voice trailed off, humble, unassuming, the kind of request that carried no entitlement. Jessica let out a snort, dripping with disdain. "Called ahead? Who told you that? We don't just hand out free upgrades because someone hopes for it. First class is for paying customers." She pointed down the aisle toward the back of the plane. "Economy is that way. Move along. Don't hold up the line." Patricia froze, her lips pressing into a thin line. She wasn't one to argue, but the harshness stung, a quiet humiliation blooming in her chest. Around her, a few first-class passengers took notice. A middle-aged man in a tailored suit swirled a glass of red wine and muttered to his companion. Another old lady trying to sneak into first class without paying. Typical. The woman beside him, a sharply dressed blonde in her 40s, giggled and nodded. They always think they deserve special treatment. Not everyone was so callous. A young woman, maybe 20, with dark hair and a phone in hand, lowered her device, frowning. "That's harsh," she whispered to her friend. "She's old and looks exhausted. They could at least be nice about it." Patricia sighed, her shoulders slumping as she turned to leave, resigned to the cramped seats in economy. But before she could take another step, a voice cut through the hum of the cabin. "Hold on a sec." The words came from a man in his 50s who stepped forward with quiet authority. He wore a crisp, expensive grey suit and carried a leather briefcase. His name was Richard Cole, a veteran airline executive and a shareholder in Pacific Wings. Fixing Jessica with a firm gaze, he said, "She's elderly and clearly not well. You really can't make an exception? I see empty seats right here." Jessica crossed her arms, her voice rising in defiance. "Who are you to tell me how to do my job? Rules are rules. Empty seats or not, it's not her seat. If you're feeling generous, give up yours, but don't expect me to bend over backwards." Richard's jaw tightened. "It's not about bending over backwards. It's about basic decency. You're humiliating her over nothing." He turned to Patricia, his tone softening. "Ma'am, take my seat for now. I'll sort this out." Patricia hesitated, her eyes glistening with gratitude and reluctance. "Thank you, sir, but I don't want to cause trouble. I'll manage." She started toward the economy section again, her steps slow and deliberate, but the tension in the cabin had already thickened, heavy as the storm clouds outside. Outside, at that moment, a figure appeared at the entrance to first class, unnoticed at first amid the brewing conflict. He wore a faded denim jacket, dark jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. Just another passenger blending into the crowd. Or so it seemed. He had boarded quietly, planning to keep a low profile on this last-minute flight to New York for a meeting with the director. But as he stepped into the cabin, his gaze landed on Patricia, his mother, and the scene unfolding before her. It was Keanu Reeves. No one saw it coming. A gasp rippled through the cabin as heads turned, eyes widening in disbelief. The suited man swirling his wine dropped his glass, crimson liquid splashing across his pristine pants. "Holy Keanu Reeves," he stammered, fumbling to wipe the stain. The blonde beside him clapped a hand over her mouth, her laughter morphing into a stunned squeak. Even Jessica froze mid-sentence, her clipboard slipping slightly in her grip. Keanu hadn't planned for this. He hadn't even known his mother was on this flight. Pacific Wings was his airline, a passion project he had built from the ground up. Not for profit, but to reflect the values of kindness and respect his mother had instilled in him during their hard-scrabble years. And now, watching her be treated like this on his own plane, a quiet fury ignited behind his calm exterior. He pulled off his cap, revealing his unmistakable face. The cabin erupted into whispers. "Is that really him? No way. Keanu owns this airline? Oh my God, that's his mom." The young woman with the phone, Lily, immediately started filming, her hands shaky with excitement. Keanu strode forward, Keanu's voice was low, but it cut through the noise like a blade. "What did you just say to my mother?" The question wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. Jessica's face drained of color as she stammered. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't know she was your mom." Patricia turned, her eyes widening in shock. "Keanu? What are you doing here?" Her voice was barely a whisper, laced with confusion and a touch of embarrassment. "I could ask you the same thing, Mum," he replied, his tone softening for her before hardening again as he faced Jessica. "Why isn't she in first class? I see empty seats. Explain that to me." Jessica fumbled, her confidence crumbling. It's policy, sir. We don't upgrade for free, no exceptions. I was just—" "Policy?" Keanu interrupted, stepping closer. "This airline is mine. I make the policies. And I didn't build it so my mother or anyone could be humiliated like this." Turning to Patricia, he gently took her arm. "Mum, sit here." He guided her to the nearest first-class seat, ignoring the stares boring into him. But the conflict wasn't over. The suited man, Victor, suddenly lurched to his feet, his face flushed with indignation. "Hey, Reeves! I paid top dollar for this seat, not to watch some celebrity play hero and shove his mom into my space. This isn't one of your movies." Keanu spun around, his eyes narrowing. "You paid for a seat, not a license to disrespect my mother. You've got a problem with it? I'll refund you double right now, but she's staying." His voice was steady, but the edge in it made Victor flinch. Still, Victor squared his shoulders, undeterred. "Oh, you think you can throw money around and call the shots? I've been a VIP with this airline longer than you've owned it, pal. This is—" He jabbed a finger at Jessica. "You? Do something! Get your manager up here!" Jessica hesitated, clearly out of her depth. But before she could respond, another flight attendant stepped forward, an older man named Carl, his graying hair and calm demeanor radiating authority. "Mr. Reeves, I apologize for this. We'll handle it." Then he turned to Patricia, his expression warm with genuine respect. "Miss Taylor, please stay. I'll make sure everything's taken care of." Outside, the plane taxied down the runway. The engines roared as it climbed through the turbulent sky, but the atmosphere in first class remained electric. Victor slumped back into his seat, muttering to his companion. "Typical Hollywood crap. Fame gets you everything." A few passengers nodded in silent agreement, their expressions sour, but Lily, still holding her phone, leaned toward her friend and whispered, "He's right to stand up for her. That jerk was laughing at her 5 minutes ago." Patricia settled into her seat beside Keanu, her hand instinctively finding his. "Keanu, you didn't have to make a scene for me. I was fine." Her voice was gentle, almost pleading, but he shook his head. "Mom, you never asked for anything. Not from me, not from anyone. I'm not letting them treat you like that." He squeezed her hand, his jaw tightening with quiet resolve. Behind them, Richard Cole, a major shareholder in Pacific Wings, watched in silence, his mind churning. He'd spent years prioritizing profits over people, cutting corners, raising fares, trimming staff. But seeing Keanu stand up for his mother with such fierce loyalty stirred something in him, a pang of guilt he couldn't shake. Then Victor stood again. His voice boomed over the hum of the engines. "Reeves, this isn't over. You think you can waltz in here, flex your fame, and screw over paying customers? I'm suing this airline for discrimination, you hear me?" He jabbed a trembling finger at Keanu, his face red with rage. Keanu rose to meet him, his presence towering despite the casual denim jacket and baseball cap. "Discrimination?" His voice was low, controlled, but sharp as a blade. "You mocked my mother for not belonging in first class. Who's really throwing their weight around here?" He stepped closer, his tone dropping to a near growl. "Go ahead, sue. I'll see you in court, and trust me, you won't like the outcome." Victor's face turned a deeper shade of crimson, but Keanu's unflinching stare made him falter. He hesitated, then slumped back into his seat, muttering under his breath, "You'll regret this, Reeves." Meanwhile, in the back of the cabin, Lily's video hit X with the caption, "Keanu Reeves just owned first class to save his mom. Legend." It exploded online, thousands of views in minutes. Comments flooded in, "This is why Keanu's the best. Those snobs in first class suck. Money can't buy class." As the plane leveled off, Carl, an older flight attendant with a calm presence, approached Keanu. "Sir, I'm sorry about Jessica. She's new, doesn't quite understand what this airline is about yet." He hesitated, then added, "I actually met your mom once, years ago, at a charity event." "She's incredible. You take after her." Keanu offered a faint smile. "Thanks. Just keep her comfortable. That's all I care about." Patricia looked at her son, her eyes misty. "You didn't need to do this," she whispered. "But thank you." She gripped his hand tighter, memories flashing. Long nights sewing costumes by candlelight just to put food on the table. She had never imagined a day when he would be the one fighting for her. Outside, lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the storm clouds ahead. But inside, the real tempest was brewing. Victor wasn't done. His voice cut through the cabin again, sharp and venomous. "You know what, Reeves? This is exactly what's wrong with the world. People like you think you can bulldoze everyone just because you've got a famous face and a fat wallet. I'm not some nobody you can push around." He jabbed a finger toward Keanu, the wine stain on his pant leg, a glaring reminder of his earlier humiliation. Keanu turned slowly, his face unreadable, his gaze burning with restrained intensity. "You're right, Victor. You're not a nobody." He leaned in slightly. "You're just a guy who thinks a first-class ticket gives him the right to treat my mother like dirt. If that's your version of somebody, I'll pass." His words were calm, but they landed like a punch. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Victor's face twisted into a sneer. "Oh, spare me the sanctimonious crap. You're not fooling anyone with this humble hero act. I'm calling my lawyer the second we land. This airline's done for." He yanked out his phone and started tapping furiously, despite the lack of signal at 30,000 feet, as if sheer willpower could connect him to his legal team. Keanu just shook his head. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm brewing inside this cabin. Patricia squeezed Keanu's hand, her voice barely above a whisper. "Keanu, let it go. He's not worth it." Her eyes pleaded with him, just as they had when he was a boy, getting into fights to defend her honor in their rough Toronto neighborhood. But Keanu shook his head, his jaw tight. "Mum, he doesn't get to talk to you like that. Nobody does." Across the aisle, Richard Cole, the airline executive, watched the exchange with growing unease. His polished exterior hid a churning conscience. He had spent years cutting costs, prioritizing profits, and making cold, calculated decisions. But watching Keanu stand so fiercely by his mother was cracking something open inside him. He adjusted his tie, exhaled, and then stood, stepping into the brewing storm. "Victor, enough," he said firmly. "You're making a fool of yourself. Sit down before you say something you can't take back." Victor whirled on him, incredulous. "Who the hell are you? Another Reeves fanboy? Stay out of this!" But Richard didn't flinch. "I'm Richard Cole, majority shareholder of Pacific Wings." His voice was calm but unyielding. "And I'm telling you to back off, or I'll have you escorted off this plane when we land. VIP or not." The weight of the threat hung heavy in the air. Victor's bravado faltered, his lips pressing into a thin line. After a tense moment, he muttered, "We'll see who gets escorted where." Then, with a glare that could cut glass, he slumped back into his seat. Just then, the plane lurched violently. A jolt, sharper than before. Glasses clinked. A tray slid off a table. A chorus of gasps filled the cabin. Then the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, steady but urgent. "Folks, this is your captain speaking. We've hit some unexpected turbulence. A storm system is moving in faster than anticipated. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. We're working to stabilize the aircraft." The announcement did little to ease the tension. Jessica, still rattled from Keanu's earlier rebuke, hurried down the aisle, clutching her clipboard like a shield. She stopped near Victor, her voice a nervous whisper. "Sir, please, we need to keep things under control." Jessica tried to maintain control, her voice strained but firm. "Sir, please." But Victor waved her off, snapping, "Control? With this clown running the show? Fix this mess or I'll have your job too." Across the aisle, Lily, the young woman who had been filming earlier, leaned toward her friend, her voice low but brimming with excitement. "This is insane. Keanu Reeves, a storm, and now this jerk. It's like a movie." She uploaded another clip to X, captioned, "Turbulence on Pacific Wings, inside and out." Keanu still the GOAT. The post went viral instantly, racking up retweets and comments. "Victor sounds like a total ass. Protect Keanu and his mom at all costs." Meanwhile, Carl, the older, steady-handed flight attendant, approached Keanu and Patricia, his presence a calming force amid the chaos. "Mr. Reeves, Miss Taylor, can I get you anything? We're doing our best up here." He glanced briefly at Victor before lowering his voice. "Don't let him get to you. Your mum's a class act. I've seen her kindness firsthand." Keanu nodded, a faint smile breaking through his otherwise tense expression. "Thanks, Carl. Just keep an eye on her for me." Patricia patted Carl's arm, her voice gentle. "You're sweet, dear. I'm fine, really." But her hands trembled slightly, betraying the strain of the ordeal. Then, the plane rocked violently again. From the back of first class, a nervous flyer, a woman in her 30s named Sarah, let out a small cry, gripping her armrests. "We're going to crash, aren't we? This is all because of this stupid fight." Her panic rippled outward, amplifying the unease in the cabin. Victor seized the moment, raising his voice. "See? This is what happens when you let egomaniacs take over. We're all screwed." Keanu stood, his voice rising just enough to cut through the tension. "Everyone relax. The pilots know what they're doing. Panicking won't help." Then he locked eyes with Sarah, his tone softening. "We're okay, I promise." His calm steadied her, and after a shaky breath she nodded. But Victor wasn't finished. "Oh, great. Now he's the captain too. Give me a break." He lunged forward, shoving past Jessica to confront Keanu once more. "You're a liability, Reeves. This airline's a joke because of you." Before Keanu could respond, Richard stepped between them, his patience snapping. "Victor, sit down, or I'll have you restrained. I'm not kidding." The weight of Richard's authority was no bluff. Victor hesitated, his glare burning with resentment, but finally backed off, though his expression promised that this wasn't over. Retribution. The storm raged on, but something had shifted in the cabin. Sarah, the nervous flyer, watched Keanu with newfound admiration. His unwavering devotion to his mother struck a deep chord within her. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her phone and typed a message to her estranged sister. "Saw something today that made me think of us. Can we talk when I'm back?" She hesitated, then hit send. A single tear slipped down her cheek. Meanwhile, Lily's videos continued to spread online, drawing thousands into the unfolding drama at 30,000 feet. In economy class, a teenage boy named Jake caught wind of the viral posts on his phone. Turning to his mother, he whispered, "That's Keanu Reeves up there, fighting for his mom." I should call Dad when we land. His parents had split years ago, and he hadn't spoken to his father since. But something about Keanu's fierce loyalty made him rethink the distance he'd let grow. At the front of the cabin, Richard Cole sat deep in thought, his polished exterior masking an inner reckoning. Then, with quiet determination, he pulled out a notebook and began scribbling furiously. After a moment, he approached Keanu, his voice low but resolute. "Reeves, I've been wrong. About this airline, about a lot of things. What you did for your mother, that's what this company should stand for." He tore out the page and handed it to Keanu. "I'm rewriting our policies, starting with this. Lifetime first-class access for her. No questions asked." Patricia gasped, covering her mouth as she read the note. "Oh, Richard, you didn't have to." But Keanu simply nodded, an unspoken understanding passing between two men, one making amends and the other acknowledging the effort. Then the plane shuddered violently. A jolt rippled through the cabin, harder than before. The lights flickered. A collective gasp rose as the cabin was plunged into darkness for just a heartbeat. Then the backup lights kicked in, casting an eerie glow over the tense, silent passengers, and the storm outside roared on. The captain's voice returned, taut with strain. "We're experiencing mechanical issues tied to the storm. We're diverting to Chicago for an emergency landing. Hang tight." Panic erupted. Victor shot up, his face red with fury. "I knew it. This is your fault, Reeves. Your damn airline is falling apart." Jessica scrambled to calm the passengers, her voice cracking as she tried to restore order. Sarah sobbed openly, but amidst the chaos, Keanu remained steady, his arm wrapped protectively around Patricia. "Mom, we're fine. They've got this." The descent was brutal. The plane bucked against the wind, rattling like a leaf in a storm. Passengers gripped their seats, prayers and curses mixing in the air. Victor's bravado crumbled into fear as he clung to his armrests. Across the aisle, Richard stared out the window, his notebook crumpled in his fist. Lily, still filming, whispered, "This is unreal." Then impact. The wheels slammed into the tarmac with a jarring thud, the plane skidding before finally grinding to a stop. Relief flooded the cabin, but it didn't last long. A new voice crackled over the intercom, not the captain's, a woman's, cool, commanding. "This is Special Agent Laura Hensley, FAA, remain seated. We are boarding to investigate reports of a disturbance and potential sabotage on this flight." The cabin doors burst open. Armed agents stormed in, their badges flashing under the dim cabin lights. Passengers froze, stunned. Agent Hensley strode to the front, her sharp gaze scanning the room. "Keanu Reeves, Victor Marshall, Richard Cole, step forward." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Keanu blinked, disbelief washing over him as Patricia clutched his arm. "Sabotage! What are you talking about?" Victor paled, his confidence shattered. "This is insane. I didn't do anything." Richard's expression hardened, but he stayed silent, stepping beside Keanu. Hensley held up a tablet, showing Lily's viral video now synced with grainy cockpit footage. An altercation in first class triggered a chain reaction. Shouting disrupted crew coordination. A tray, knocked loose during the fight, jammed a critical control panel during turbulence. This flight was nearly lost because of it. Her tone left no room for argument. "We're detaining you for questioning." Victor erupted in protest as agents cuffed him first. Then they turned to Keanu and Richard. Patricia rose from her seat, her voice trembling but fierce. "No, you can't take my son. He was protecting me." Keanu turned to her, his eyes calm despite the chaos. "Mom, it's okay. I'll handle this." As they were led away, Lily's camera captured everything. Her final live stream caption, "Live. Keanu arrested after saving his mom. WTF just happened?" The feed cut abruptly as agents confiscated her phone. Outside, rain lashed the tarmac, lightning illuminating the surreal scene. Patricia sank into her seat, tears streaking down her face, still clutching Richard's note. She had never asked for any of this, yet a quiet trip had spiraled into a storm, one that reshaped lives, exposed truths, and left the world watching in shock. And somewhere, in a cold holding room, Keanu sat, staring at the wall, wondering how kindness had landed him here. What do you think of this wild ending? Keanu, Victor, and Richard hauled off in cuffs after a stormy flight. But who's really to blame? Will Keanu face charges for standing up for his mum? Or will the investigation uncover Victor's role in escalating the chaos? Could Jessica's carelessness be the real cause of the near crash? The truth is still up in the air, just like Flight 217. Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments below. Down, arrow, airplane fire.